Well, good morning and welcome to Compass. Our mission is navigating people to God. My name is Nate. I'm the pastor here at Compass North Fort Worth, and we're so glad you're here, so glad you're worshiping with us. If you're a guest, I would love to meet you after our service is over, and so I hope that you'll stop by our Next Steps area. And I'll just settle a few arguments once and for all that were brought up today. First of all, I don't care about Ross or Rachel, okay? All I care about is Ohio State winning a national championship this year. And then the other thing is Christmas decorations should go up, yesterday, okay? That's what mine did. So, hey, Christmas is in our house, and I'm a Christmas from November 1st to January 15th kind of guy. So I'm going to interview all of our other candidates from now on, make sure that that's what they believe as well. So, hey, we're glad that you're here, glad you're worshiping with us, and we're kicking off this new series today. And there's a question I want you to think about as we begin today. If your money could talk, what do you think it would say to you? Like, what if you pulled out a good old-fashioned GW out of your wallet and it started talking to you? What would it say to you? Like, some of you might say, there's a reason why you only have $1 to your name, or maybe it would say, don't spend it all in one place, you big spender, right? Or maybe this is a Christmas reference, keep the change, you filthy animal, because you're gonna need it, right? If your money could talk, and do you ever wonder if it could talk? Do you wonder what it would say? Because if our money could talk, if our money was actually for us, I think it would say something to us, but it would probably not surprise us what our money would say. Like, I want you to think back for a minute, some of the things that you've spent money on, maybe some places that you've gone. Anybody gone anywhere that they wish that they could get their money back from? Like it was just a really bad trip or something, or maybe a place that you wish you'd never visited before, or maybe you've purchased something that you wish that you could take back, but it was past the date, right? Anybody have one of those moments in their life? I was thinking about something that I spent a lot of money on one time that I wish that I had never wasted the money on. I was in middle school, and I remember flipping through the pages of a sports magazine, and on this one page, there was an advertisement for these things called jump soles, right? The jump soles, anybody else buy jump soles like me? Okay, I'm the only sucker in the room, but these jump soles, they promise that you would be able to increase your vertical jump, and because I grew up in the era of Michael Jordan, I wanted to be like Mike, and so I bought these jump soles. They were a couple $100s, but the problem is I should have just taken the advice of Wesley Snipes that white men can't jump, right? And I bought these jump soles. Really, they helped me jump a little bit higher, but I never had one of those I believe I could fly moments like Michael Jordan in Space Jam, and so I wasted a whole bunch of money on something that I wish that I could take back. And you've probably wasted money as well. Now, the reality is when it comes to our money, we could probably figure out what our money would tell us. And actually, I want you to know that this series isn't about what our money would say, but it's instead a parallel of what our money would say if it could talk and what Jesus actually did say when he did talk about money and possessions. Now, if you grew up in the church, you probably know what Jesus said about money. Jesus actually talks about money and possessions more than he talked about anything else in the gospel accounts that we have of Jesus' life. And in those 4 gospels, there's 40 different parables that are recorded. And of those 40 parables, you know how many of those Jesus talks about money or possessions? He talks about them almost half the time. He talks about it 16 of those 40 times. But it's interesting to me what Jesus does talk about when he talks about it, and it might be interesting and it might even shock you, that when Jesus talks about money and possessions, he doesn't actually ask anybody for money. He doesn't ask anybody to give anything except for one occasion where he asked somebody in the crowd, hey, anybody have a coin? And so somebody hands him a coin, and then Jesus does that magic trick where he pulled the quarter out from behind your ear. Okay, that's not really what he does, but he takes this coin and he gives this illustration, and then after he's done with the illustration, he flips the coin back to the guy because he didn't want it. Now what was Jesus up to? Why would Jesus do this? What was he trying to prove? When it comes to money and possessions, Jesus was really up to something and he was really after something, but what we'll find out is it wasn't anybody's money. Now, if our money could talk, if our money had a voice to it, I think one thing that our money would tell us is this: I can add meaning to your life, but I'm not the meaning of your life. That our money would remind us that it's a much better means than an end. In fact, if you make money an end, what happens is you'll just end up alone. But being that money can be a means to an end, That's truly what makes money meaningful. And here's what I want us to grasp. I think we have to understand this before we can go any further today. Being a means to an end is really what makes anything meaningful, right? Like, think about this. If you want to live a meaningful life, you have to figure out how you can become a means to an end that goes way beyond you. And here's what we're going to discover through this series and where I want to take you. You see, when you decide to be a means to an end, your money becomes a means rather than an end as well. And you begin to view all your money, you begin to view all your possessions, you begin to view your net worth, you begin to view the check that you receive on a weekly basis or maybe a monthly basis or every other week basis. You begin to view that instead as a tool. And that's what Jesus is going to teach us today in one of these, what you talking about, Willis, moments that he has in Scripture. Now, if you've got a Bible or a Bible app, I want you to turn with me to Luke chapter 16. And it's in Luke chapter 16 that Luke, who is the writer of this gospel account of Jesus' life, Luke was a doctor. We talked about him a few weeks ago in our Forensic Faith series. And we said that Luke, as he found out who Jesus was, he put all these facts down. And Luke was a guy who did it in chronological order. And so we get to Luke chapter 16, and Luke tells this illustration in this story of what Jesus did one day. And he talks about money and possessions. This is what it says starting in verse 1. It says, there was a certain rich man who had a manager handling his affairs. Now, when Jesus said this, what we have to understand is that everybody would have known that Jesus was just telling a story. But it wasn't a true story. He was just telling a story to prove a point. And so he goes on to say this. He says, one day a report came to the manager that the manager was wasting his employer's money. So the employer called him in and said, what's this I hear about you? Get your report in order because you're going to be fired. So Jesus says there's a rich man who has so much money, he doesn't know what to do with it all. So he hires somebody to manage his money for him. Basically, this guy's kind of like a day trader. He's buying and selling in this guy's name. But what happens over time is that the manager of this money, he starts doing some side deals along the way, and he starts using this rich man's money for his own benefit, and the rich man gets word of it. And so I imagine this scene taking place that the rich man, he got word of this and he goes to this guy, and it's kind of like a scene out of the movie The Office. Has anybody seen that movie? Like the rich man comes to this guy and he's like, yeah, Peter, the cover letter, you haven't been putting those on your TPS reports. And yeah, Peter, we're gonna need a budget summary by the end of the day on my desk. And yeah, we're gonna ask you not to come in on Saturday because you're fired for the side deals. And that's really what I think happens in that moment. But as Jesus says this, what happens is that the crowd on that day, they begin to lean in. They're like, what is Jesus gonna say next? And as they lean in, Jesus goes on to say this, verses 3 and 4. It says, the manager thought to himself, now what? My boss has fired me. I don't have the strength to dig ditches, and I'm too proud to beg. Oh, I know how to ensure that I'll have plenty of friends who will give me a home when I'm fired. So Jesus says that this guy is thinking about what's next. He's thinking about, man, I'm about to lose my job. I'm losing my income. What am I going to do? How am I going to provide for myself? And so he begins to think about the future in mind. And then it goes on to say this in verses 5 to 7. It says, so he invited each person who owed money to his employer to come and discuss the situation. He asked the first one, how much do we owe you? Do you owe him? The man replied, I owe him 800 gallons of olive oil. And so the manager told him, take the bill and quickly change it to 400 gallons. And how much do you owe my employer? He asked the next man. I owe him 1,000 bushels of wheat, was the reply. Here, the manager said, take the bill and change it to 800 bushels. Jesus says that this guy who's about to be fired at the end of the day, he comes up with this plan, and his plan is that he's going to call up all of the debtors of his boss, the rich man, and he's going to call them up, and he's going to start giving them these discounts. And so he calls this first guy up and he says, hey, how much do you owe? And the guy says 1,000 or 800 gallons of olive oil. And he says, just cut that in half, 50% discount for you. Then he goes to the next guy and he's like, I'll give you a 20% discount. And then he starts going down the list. He's like, 25 for you, 35 for you, 15 for you, and on and on. And look, if you're the person who owes the money in the story and you're getting a discount, like depending on your age, if you're a teenager, you're probably saying something like, bet, man, that's awesome, right? Or if you're a little bit older like me, it's like, sweet, man, that's a sweet deal, right? Or you get a little bit older, it's like, oh, thank you so much, right? You know, we change, our vocabulary changes as we get a little bit older. And so these people are grateful for the discounts they've been given. But then on the other side, there are those that are probably the ones owed the money, and they're thinking, no wonder this guy's getting fired. I mean, here he is, he's cutting these deals and taking even more of this guy's money away from him. And in the crowd that Jesus is talking to on this day, there are people, I imagine, who are on both sides, those who owed money and those who were owed money. But what Jesus is doing is showing through this guy, he was leveraging the situation to his point. And like he knew that the people that he was offering these discounts to, he knew that they were gonna be grateful, and they might say something like this: man, thank you so much. Thank you for helping us out. Man, you don't understand how much that helps us. If there's anything we can ever do to make it up to you, just let us know. And as some of the people said that, I'm guessing the guy's like, oh, don't worry, I'll be calling you tomorrow, right? I'm gonna need a place to stay. And so this manager, he gives all these discounts to all these people before he gets fired. And some of you might be thinking, well, this guy didn't even need to do that. Like if all he wanted to do to find a place to stay, he just did it. He's gonna end up in jail for some insider trading. I mean, that's what's going on here, right? That's what we would think is gonna happen, that he's gonna get himself locked up for what he's just done. But remember, Jesus always used parables to teach and tell a story. And in these parables, there was always someone in the story who represented God. And there's always someone in the story who represents the audience that Jesus is talking to. And this is where the twist comes in the story. Verse 8, it says this, it says, the rich man had to admire the dishonest rascal for being so shrewd. I love this. Like, I laughed when I read that the first time. The rich man is like, dude, fist bump, blow it up, right? I mean, that's amazing what you just pulled off. And he's actually like congratulating this guy who has just ripped him off for some money. And the reason that he's congratulating him is because this guy had thought with the future in mind. Despite his limited time and limited resources, he's thinking with the future in mind. And of course, in Jesus' audience that day, there are people who are confused. Maybe you're a little bit confused, like, why is the rich man congratulating this guy for what he's just done? This doesn't make sense. But this is where Jesus begins to prove his point about how God views our wealth and our possessions. Which when we understand this, we will understand that God views it differently, I think, than we do. Because notice what he says next, is following up in verses 8 to 12, he says this, and it is true that the children of this world are more shrewd in dealing with the world around them than are the children of the light. And he goes on to say this. Here's the lesson. Use your worldly resources to benefit others and make friends. Then when your possessions are gone, they will welcome you to an eternal home. If you're faithful in the little things, you will be faithful in the large ones. But if you're dishonest in the little things, you won't be honest with greater responsibilities. And if you're untrustworthy about worldly wealth, who will trust you with the true riches of heaven? And if you're not faithful with other people's things, why should you be trusted with the things of your own? Now catch what Jesus is saying here. He's saying the people of this world, they actually do a better job of thinking about the future than those of us who know where we could end up spending eternity. The money manager was being commended for making the best use of the limited time and the limited resources that he had. Jesus is not commending this guy for being dishonest. He's commending him for taking advantage of his opportunity. And this is what Jesus is trying to get us to understand when it comes to our wealth, when it comes to our possessions. That we've only got a short amount of time here on this earth. And knowing that should change our focus. That's got to change our mindset. And I think the question we have to ask ourselves is this: how do I get the maximum use out of it when the opportunity comes my way? Now don't miss this, because this is where Jesus really begins to lean in. In fact, if you're a follower of Christ, Jesus is speaking to those of you right now. If you're not, if you're just maybe new to this whole Christianity thing and Jesus, and you're just kind of exploring it, you get a pass on this. But I want you to listen, because I think this is helpful to understand who Jesus is and what he's really come to do for us. But this is what he says in verse 9. He says, here's the lesson. Use your worldly resources to benefit others and make friends. Then when your possessions are gone, they will welcome you in to an eternal home. He's like, use your worldly resources to help other people. This is what Jesus was all about. He said he came into this world to serve other people, not to be served. Jesus says, use your worldly resources to help others so that when your time on this earth is up, you will be welcomed into this eternal home. And look, I get that like this might not make sense right now, but what Jesus is really trying to do is to help us understand that you can do something with your eternal or earthly resources that can have eternal consequences. That you can be a means to an end that goes way beyond this life. And Jesus is talking about something that the crowd probably didn't understand on that day. Because Jesus is standing there in front of them. He's still fully human, yet fully God, but he hasn't died that death on the cross. He hasn't resurrected from the dead. He hasn't ascended into heaven. And so the whole idea of heaven is still foreign to them. But you see, Luke is writing this from the other side. Luke's compiled all the data, he's put it all together, and he realizes that there's something else awaiting all of us when we put our trust in Christ. And what Jesus is trying to get the crowd to understand, but also us to understand, is this, that the resources that we have right now have the potential to make a forever difference. You know, maybe you've heard it said before. Anybody ever tell you can't take it with you? You ever hear that? Or maybe like a wise man once told my wife, Amanda and I, when we were living with them, and she was crying because none of our stuff was with us and we were living in another state away from it all. He said, it's all gonna burn one day anyway, right? I mean, you can't take your stuff with you, right? But you know what you can take with you? There is one thing you can take with you when you go to heaven one day, and you know what that is? You can take other people with you. And that's what Jesus is getting at here. He says we can make a forever difference. We can be a means to an end that goes further than us. Now, here's what I think Jesus is honing in on, and where he's trying to drive home this point to those of us who are followers of Christ. And we're going to dig into this more over the next couple weeks. But Jesus is really digging into this idea of what it looks like to be generous. But Jesus doesn't say it's a specific percentage that we ought to give. He's not like, you know what, it's 10%, that's what you should give. No, Jesus, he goes a step further. He kind of flips it upside down, and he says, I want you to think in terms of 100% of what you have is a potential means to an even greater end. Now, the question I think we can all ask ourselves, whether we're followers of Christ or not, is this: how can I leverage more of what I have as a means to an end that is outside of what benefits me? You know, some of you have already cracked this code. Some of you have already figured out what it looks like to be generous. Maybe like me, you grew up in a home where you were raised in the church and your parents taught you from a very early age, like, you've got to be generous with what God has given to you. And so when my wife Amanda and I got married, because we grew up in those kind of homes, we had decided already that we were going to at least give 10%, but we were going to try to do more than that. And so we would give 10% and we would give more. And my wife, Amanda, who's super generous, like over the top generous, she decided she wanted to give more, and we had a lot of joy. Well, she had a lot of joy in giving more. And it took me a while to catch up to that. But what I've come to find out through the years is that there truly is more joy in generosity. Like, we love being able to give to the things that we care about, that we love to help other people out. And I know this might seem foreign to you, this whole idea of generosity. It might not make sense to you. Like, you're like, I only make a little bit. I don't know how I can give anything away. I could barely survive on what I have, Nate. But here's what I've come to find. Even in those times where we've had very little, what we've come to find is that there's so much joy in being generous. You know, several years ago, I worked at a church in Cincinnati, and it was back when Saturday night service was kind of a big thing coming into a lot of churches. And so we started this Saturday night service, and I worked with this guy. His name was Steve, and Steve was kind of the head of this service, and he made sure everything worked. And so he decided that we weren't going to pass offering buckets like we do on Sunday mornings. But we still wanted to give an opportunity for people to be generous. And so he had these little wooden boxes created that sat in the back of the room by the doors. And they had a little slot in them. And you could just drop any gift, a financial gift that you had in that little box. And so at the end of the service, we would always talk about generosity just like we do here. And Steve would say, if you have a gift that you would like to give, just drop it in the box in the back. And he was trying to come up with a name for it. And so he came up with this name called Joy Boxes. That's what we called them. And there was this guy named Jimmy who, he came on Saturday nights. So Jimmy was about my age. Jimmy had been in a really bad accident as a teenager. He and some buddies one day thought it would be a really good idea to go car surfing, and he got on top of a minivan, and he fell off the van, and he hit his head, and it caused him to have some physical ailments and some mental disabilities after that moment. But every time we got to that moment in the service where we talked about those joy boxes, Jimmy, he would do this. He would just go, Steve would go, hey, in just a minute, we're gonna be leaving. If you have a financial gift that you'd like to give, just place it in the joy boxes. And Jimmy would go, "Aah!" Like it would be so loud, like the guy from the Goonies is what it sounded like. And Jimmy had so much joy because he was able to give to God. That was something that he found this extreme joy in. Now, I want to challenge you to do an experiment next week. When we go to the generosity moment, we pass the buckets. I want you to make as much noise as you possibly can. Now, it might freak some people out, but that's okay, because we should be joyful when we get the chance to be generous. Now, if you've never done this before, if you've never been generous with what you have, you might be like, Nate, I hear what you're saying, but I don't know where to start. And if that's you, here's what I would say. Just pick a percentage. Pick a percentage that you want to live on, and pick a percentage that you want to give by. And start giving to that. Give to something or someone that you love. Notice I'm not even asking you right now to give to Compass North Fort Worth. I'm just saying, start being generous first. I mean, I would love it if you gave to Compass North Fort Worth. It helps us so much, and we're able to do things like these Thanksgiving drives and other things that we've been able to share with you over the last several months. But just start, pick a percentage, because we should never be controlled by our lifestyle. We should be the ones in control of our lives. You see, that's what smart, shrewd, forward-thinking people do. They think in terms of a percentage that they want to live on and a percentage that they want to give away, and then they give away. And so that's what I want to encourage you to do this week. Now, if you're married, I want you to agree on that together, all right? Because if you don't have the same number and you decide you're going to give and your spouse says another thing, then that's going to start a battle, and then I'm going to do counseling all week long, and I'm not going to be able to get ready to preach next week, okay? But make sure that you figure this out together. And here's the other thing that Jesus challenges us in this parable, that is this. Everything that we have to think with this mindset. Everything that I have, everything that has been given to me, actually, I don't own it. I don't own it. It's not mine. And if we think that way, then what happens is we won't hoard stuff. Like when we pack up the box to take it up to the attic, we'll say, you know what, I don't need that. Or when the attic is full and we take that box to our storage unit that we had to rent, that we don't actually ever get anything out of, we just keep putting more into it, right? We will stop thinking that way, and we will start giving away. And when we do that, it's freeing. You know, over the last 18 years that Amanda and I have been married, we've moved a lot. We've had different houses, different apartments. And so every time we've moved, we've gotten to the point where we've gotten really good at just giving stuff away. Because honestly, I just hate moving more and more boxes. And so we just started giving things away. But what we've come to find is that's really freeing. And what we decided to do several years ago is if someone asked us to help them out, we were going to do everything that we possibly could to help people that were in need. Now, that's dangerous for me to admit in a crowd this size, because inevitably somebody's going to come up afterwards and go, Pastor Nate, I need $100. You got $100? I don't have 100, but I got $1 on me, right? And that's whoever gets it first, all right? But you see, there's joy in generosity, and we decided a long time ago that we'd rather be generous than rather look like Ebenezer Scrooge. Because we've realized that being generous means that we get to be an even greater means to an even greater end. And look, I get some of you might be thinking, look, Pastor Nate, this is great. I'm glad that you're able to be generous and that you and your wife have figured this out, but you don't know my financial situation. You don't know where I'm at, and I'm clearly not in the same place that you are. And if that's where you're at and that's how you might be feeling, let me share something that I think can be helpful to every person here today. Here's what I know. We all have several things in our life that determine and factor into our financial decisions in life, don't we? We all have those things. And so knowing that, I want to suggest that you begin to ask yourself a question that will help you live the life that I believe we all want to live, the generous kind of mindset that we want to have, but we're just not sure how to get there. And that question that I want you to ask yourself is this: do I want more stuff or do I want more stories? Because when our time here on this earth is up, our funeral comes, people are going to talk about us, but they're not going to talk about all the stuff that we had. They're not going to say, man, they had a beautiful house and nice cars and their bank account was full and wish I was on the wheel so I got some of that. That's not really what they're going to talk about. What they're really going to talk about is they're going to talk about you. And if they're generous, they'll talk about what you've done with what you had. Every week here at Compass, we take that moment in our service to share those generosity moments because we love what God is doing through our church family here, and we want to talk about that. We want to celebrate that what your generosity allows us to do in this place, in this mobile setting that we're in. We're able to do so many incredible things. And it's because of the generosity of so many people who have come before us that this campus exists, because a few years ago, there was a whole group of people, some of you are in this room, who said, you know what, we want to make sure that the people in the North Fort Worth area have a place to worship, that there's a place where people could be navigated to God, and they wanted that to be a part of their story. You see, when we're generous, your generosity makes those kind of stories possible, stories like we saw last Sunday. If you were here at this service last Sunday, it was just incredible. It was one of my favorite moments since we've launched this campus, where we had baptisms inside for the first time, and we didn't have an animal trough that people were getting baptized in. And it was amazing to see those stories of life change take place. And as I think about it, I was just overjoyed all week thinking about the fact that there was a daughter who baptized her dad. There were siblings who got baptized together. There was a father who baptized his son, and there were students, because they've been coming to the garage, they've experienced life change, and they want to make Jesus number one in their life. What an amazing day that was, and that's what it's all about. That's why it matters that much. You see, every child that comes to faith, every adult who makes a decision to turn back to God, every marriage that gets restored, every teenager who gets dragged to the garage on Wednesday nights by their parents, who turns their life around and makes Jesus number one in your life, that's a story that you get to be a part of because of your generosity. And for those of you who have been generous, as the pastor of Compass North Fort Worth, let me just say this. Let me just say thank you to each and every one of you. Thank you for changing the lives of other people, because it matters so much. You see, I hope we never lose sight of that. I don't know about you, but those stories are worth way more than any stuff that I can ever acquire here on this earth. But look, I also get, you got to pay bills, and you've got to make a living, and some of you, you're sending kids to college. Some of you, you're still paying for kids in college, or you're paying for weddings that took place 5 years ago still, or you're looking forward to retirement and you're saving for that. And so I'm not advocating irresponsible living. I'm just saying we got to ask ourselves this question sometimes: do I want more stuff or do I want more stories? This is what Jesus is getting at. Money can add meaning to your life when you use it as a means to an end that goes beyond you. Look back at verses 10 to 12 and notice what Jesus says here. He says, if you're faithful in the little things, you will be faithful in the large ones. But if you're dishonest in the little things, you won't be honest with greater responsibilities. And if you're untrustworthy about worldly wealth, who will trust you with the true riches of heaven? And if you are not faithful with other people's things, why should you be trusted with the things of your own? Here's really what Jesus is getting at. You see, no matter how much you have, no matter where you think it came from. Our money, our wealth is not only a means to an end. Not only is it a tool that can help other people, but it's a test as well. Just like the manager in the story that Jesus tells. We've got a limited time and limited opportunity to make a difference. And we can make a forever difference, but we've got to think with the future in mind. You know, I think God's testing each and every one of us. And he's saying, what kind of kingdom are you going to build? Are you building an earthly kingdom? Or are you building a kingdom that will go far beyond this life and that can impact so many more? I like what Mark Batterson says about this. He says, remember, God doesn't bless us to raise our standard of living. God blesses us to raise our standard of giving. I'm grateful that God has blessed me so that I am able to be more generous and to give more so that I can impact the lives of more people. And look, maybe as we've been talking about this, you're thinking, well, Nate, I hear what you're saying here, and I'm listening to this story, but Jesus is talking about the manager of somebody else's money. I'm not the manager in the story, Nate. Like it's my house, I have the deed, it's my car, I purchased it, I have the title in my lockbox, I have the checkbook, it's my credit card, I'm the one who gets to swipe it, I own it all. And if that's your thinking, if your money could talk, I think it would confirm what Jesus is saying at the end of this story. He would say, if your money could talk, it would say, I'll still be here when you're gone. And the moment that you think you own me, I actually own you. Because we all, like the money manager in the parable, we're just holding on to it for a short time. We're not the owners of it, we're the managers of it. And so knowing that, who's the one who owns it? I mean, Jesus is the one, God is the one who owns it. Like, he's the one who has given it to us. Just like in the story, God is the owner of the story. We're the managers of this money. And we can go all the way back to the beginning. In the book of Genesis, when God created the earth, and then he put Adam on this earth, he didn't tell Adam, hey, here's the keys to this earthly kingdom. It's all yours. No, he said, here, this is yours to take care of. This is yours to manage. And when we understand that, it changes everything. What Jesus is saying is this: manage it well, but please don't get confused. If our money could talk, it would say, I'm a means to an end, but I'm not the end. I'm a tool and a test, and I can add meaning to your life, but please don't get confused. I'm not the meaning of your life. So what do we do with this? Where do we go from here? For some of you, you might be thinking, see, I knew it. This is what the church always does. The church just wants my money. Pastors, every time I walk into church, they're just asking for more money. And if that's where you're at, I would just say you got to draw your own conclusions on this. But if that's what you're thinking right now, I want to ask you, can you give me 6 weeks? Can you give us 6 weeks to show you what the church is really all about? Because I'm going to be telling a little bit more about that over the next few weeks, and I think that might change your mind. Or maybe you're here today and you're like, you know what, Jesus just wants my money. See, that's what he wants. Nope, Jesus doesn't want your money. Jesus never asked for anybody's money. Or maybe as we're talking today, you're like, I don't really grasp this whole eternal thing and heaven, and that stuff, I'm still not understanding that, and that's where you're at. I get that as well. But for those of us who are followers of Christ, for those of us who have settled in our life that this life is not the end of life, but it's just really the beginning of something else. And you hate the greed that wells up inside of you, and you hate the fact that you want to do good and your heart says yes, but your actions say no, and you want to be generous, but you're not sure how to, and you're like, where do I start? Here's where I think we start. We don't start with our money. We don't even start with a percentage. We start with something bigger than that. And so here's the question to wrestle with this week. I want you to write this down, and I want you to think about it all week. If being a means to an end is what gives your meaning, life, and purpose, to what ends do you want your life to be a means? If you don't know what that is, maybe you ask yourself this question: what is it that I want people to say about me after I'm gone? Or maybe a better question to ask yourself is this: what is it that breaks my heart? What is it that breaks your heart and you want to do something about, or maybe you're already doing something about, but you want to do more about it? As we close out today, I want to share with you what breaks my heart. You know, what breaks my heart is that there are separated families. What breaks my heart is that there are lives that have been torn apart by addiction. What breaks my heart is that there are people who have been told that they are unlovable and unacceptable by the church. What breaks my heart is that there are those people who deal with depression and anxiety and fear and they don't know where to turn. What breaks my heart is that there are single moms and widows who are barely making it by. What breaks my heart is that there's hatred towards other races and socioeconomic backgrounds that happens in our community. What breaks my heart is that many churches don't look or don't act the way that Jesus calls us to act. They don't love the way that Jesus has called us to love. And I want to change that. I want Compass North Fort Worth to always be a place where people know that they will find love and acceptance, where they don't feel outcast or unwanted. I want this to be a place where they can walk through the doors with the baggage that they have. They don't have to drop them outside. They can bring that in, that they can bring their mess in, because we are all messy people who are in need of the help and the hope of Jesus in our lives. And I want this to be a place where people know that Jesus is for all people, not some people, all people. That's what brings meaning and purpose to my life. And at the end of the day, at the end of my life, I want to be as generous as I can be so that maybe, just maybe, one more person will make it to heaven with me one day. Because I realize what Jesus did for me. Jesus made the ultimate sacrifice. He gave up more than I can ever give because he gave his life for you and for me when he died on the cross. And I want other people to know that. You know, at the end of the day, I don't think any of us want a tombstone that reads, he or she ate, drank, was merry, the end. I don't think that's the kind of legacy that we want to live. That's not a life that we want to be remembered by. At the end of the day, I think we would all agree we just want to make a difference in somebody else's life. So how do we do that? It starts here. It starts in the heart. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. I want you to ask yourself this question this week. What is it that breaks my heart? And when you begin to wrestle with that, and when you figure that out, you will begin to be generous, and it will not only change you, but it will begin to change others as well. It can be a means to an even greater end. Your money can be a tool that makes a huge difference. So this week, I want to challenge you to ask yourself that question I just gave you a minute ago. If being a means to an end is what gives your life meaning and purpose, to what end do you want your life to be a means? You know, Jesus finished out this story of this teaching. In the crowd on that day, there are those who are the religious leaders, the Pharisees of that day. And the Pharisees were always around whenever Jesus was teaching, because they were looking for that moment when Jesus would trip up and he would say something that they could use against him. And Luke says that the Pharisees were there on that day. And in verse 14, notice what it says. It says, the Pharisees who dearly loved their money heard all this, and they scoffed at him. We've got two options, I think, what Jesus is saying. You can either be a means to an end that goes beyond you, or you can be just like the Pharisees. You know, whenever it mentions the Pharisees, we never hear their names. You want to know why that is? Because they cared more about themselves and their own money than they cared about the opportunity to impact other people's lives. So I think ultimately what Jesus is saying is don't be a Pharisee. Be a means to an end that goes beyond you, because you can make a difference. Let's pray. Father, we come to you today and we thank you for your love for us. We thank you for the generosity that you displayed to us by sending Jesus to the cross so that we could be restored, that our lives could be changed forever. God, we thank you so much for the generous gift that you gave. God, help us to be a means to an end that goes beyond us. Help us to find joy in being generous. allow us to make a difference in the lives of people we know and those that we don't know. Because we say we want to do whatever it takes to navigate people to God. We pray these things in your name.